What's up, everyone, and welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy show with me, your host, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, June 18th. I am taking your questions live, so jump right in the chat, drop them there. And full disclosure, I was a bad mailbag host this week. I did not send out any kind of post to collect those mailbag questions. So I don't have mailbag questions today, unfortunately, but I'll answer any that we get live, of course. And I have a good topic here. Our topic for today, as you see on the graphic, if you are watching on YouTube, it is fades. It is fades for fantasy football in 2025. We'll call it more best ball and redraft focus rather than dynasty, of course, on this one in particular. But we'll go ahead and dive right in because my internet connection, I think it's a little sketchy right now. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right in just in case anything happens so I can get through as much as humanly possible of this because I got a nice little list here. Some potential fades that you might not be feeling, or maybe you're on the same page, and maybe I just need to explain some stuff out to you guys for you to see my perspective on this, because some of these are a little nuanced fades. These are not your typical, we're going to fade this guy because his production is going to be crappy. That is not the case for some of these guys. These are fades of some pretty decent fantasy performers, and a lot of when it comes to fades, a lot of the time, it often has nothing to do with absolute fantasy production, more so ADP, where these guys are currently ranked, where I anticipate they will be ranked. I can love a player to the moon and not want to draft him because, unfortunately, his ADP doesn't align with where I think best suits the fantasy production or the positional production that he will have in that place. So let's dive into it because some of these are going to be a little fun for you. We're going to start off spicy here because this is one of everybody's golden boys. But I've got some concerns, and they're not concerns that he is going to fail. He had a fine season last year. I expect it to trend upwards. I love his wide receiver one. If you don't know who I'm talking about, it's Justin Herbert is my quarterback fade. I talked previously about the depth of the quarterback position this year. And oftentimes we get very wrapped up in saying, the position is so deep. It's so deep every single year. You say quarterback is just deep. And sometimes it doesn't really turn out to be as deep as you thought it was. But if it makes you feel more comfortable, I am not typically a quarterback is so deep kind of person. Deep for me usually means that I feel comfortable waiting until a little bit outside the mid round. I'm not saying, I'm going to, fade the top 12 and I'm going to, only draft late. I'm taking the guy that is QB 20. I am waiting. I'm not that kind of deep kind of fantasy quarterback, late round quarterback kind of person. So when I'm saying that quarterback is deep this year, it has a little bit of a different meaning to me because I'm not someone that typically says that every single year and abides by it and waits to the very last minute to draft. So when you are looking at those borderline QB ones for me and those further back players into that QB2 area, it gets very intriguing, right? Let's run down a little list here. You are looking at a very steady quarterback in Brock Purdy being drafted, borderline QB1, often outside of the top 12 QB rankings as well. A lot of upside in a rookie quarterback like Caleb Williams, the proven track record of a guy like Dak Prescott that has shown when he is healthy, he is a clear QB1 with ridiculous upside. The rushing upside of a guy like Justin Fields, a potential bounce back year for my boy Jordan Love here. He had that sophomore, so we're calling it technically a sophomore slump because, he wasn't really a sophomore last year. But in terms of when, being an actual starter, last year was a sophomore season, and he definitely had that slump and dealt with injuries. So we're looking at a potential bounce back season from him. He's got that rushing upside as well. He's got a new top potential wide receiver here. So he could be rounding out this receiving core very well. We can keep going here. We've got Drake May. I talked about him last week and the incredible upside that I see in him, the potential for him in really all formats, but really this year to be very underrated as somebody who's being drafted as a mid QB2, has incredible rushing upside, has an improved offensive line, and fingers crossed, an upgraded wide receiving core. And, we've also got, let's keep going, CJ Stroud, a potential bounce back there. Trevor Lawrence, brand new offense of someone who has proven to turn offenses around, to help quarterbacks find their identity. He's in that system that we love, right? Bringing an offense that is designed to put quarterbacks in the best position to succeed. And now he has got an absolutely stacked receiving core. We've got Tua Tagovailoa, I talked about as a potential bounce back candidate as well. We get a healthy Tyreek Hill returning, a better schedule for Tua. And then we always have the very reliable streaming option of Matt Stafford, right? It's getting, this is when I say it's deep, like it's legitimately deep this year. We even got JJ McCarthy. I talked about him last week and the potential upside that he has. Bryce Young, you guys know that I love Bryce Young. I could go on, but we've gotten back into this very low end, borderline QB2, borderline QB3, and I'm still talking about guys that I like. So I started with Brock Purdy for a reason, because that's kind of like that cutoff place between him and Justin Herbert. And when I'm looking at fading Justin Herbert, again, this is not a knock on him. I loved the connection that he formed with Ladd McConkey. I'm very much so in on Ladd McConkey. I have no issue with Ladd McConkey's elevated ADP. What I have a problem with Justin Herbert, and why he's more of a fade for me, is I have a problem leaning into a quarterback that does offer a little bit of rushing upside, but not something that's serious enough for me to really consider it massive added fantasy value. We have to rely on him and the production that we get from his arms. We need touchdowns to return to the prior production. We need that in order for him to pay off where he's going to be being drafted. He simply doesn't have that ceiling of the guys being drafted behind him. He doesn't have that Justin Fields ceiling if he doesn't have that significant increase in touchdowns. And a lot of our perception in terms of us saying, okay, we're liking Justin Herbert, he's back, let's, elevate him in ADP, is because our expectations of the old Justin Herbert are kind of based off the upward swing that he had at the end of last season, which was cool. But some of that was a little bit of funky numbers of facing bad teams. Right? New England was one of them. Las Vegas was one of them. Not saying that it was all propped up by that, but to sit there and look at the end of that production and say that that's what we can expect from him on a weekly basis, I feel like that's a little bit of a reach there. Then we also have to look at the fact that we've got the addition of Marion Hampton. We've got Najee Harris, right? So we're looking at a backfield that they probably want to lean aggressively on the ground game. It's going to be a fine backfield here. Herbert's ceiling isn't as high as what we're looking for, and the floor can be a little bit shaky for a guy that we're drafting above guys who have that natural rushing upside baked into their ADP. Realistically, top 5 is a big reach for him to be able to achieve within the context of the type of quarterbacks that we have right now. And the quarterbacks being drafted after him, they've got that upside. And top 5 is very much in play for them. So unfortunately, purely because of ADP value, I just don't think we're getting what we need in order to really lean aggressively into Justin Herbert when you've got guys that offer you a higher ceiling being drafted after him. If it was a little bit further back, I got no problem with that. But there are just too many guys that we should be taking ahead of him. We're going to go by position here. So I'm going to go with running backs next. But before I go into running backs, I am going to say hi. Hi, Angie in the chat. Thank you guys for tuning in. And I am going to do a word from our sponsors real quick here.
If you play in Dynasty, you need Dynasty Deluxe, our premium package for Dynasty Leaguers. We rank over 300 players, updated every week, all year long. And there's a win now mode and a rebuild mode with superflex and tight end premium controls. And a Dynasty League sync where you can say, sync down all of my sleeper teams, all my FFPC teams. And then you can browse around your leagues for who has needs. And then you can use our trade finder to see what kinds of trades are happening in leagues that are similar to the one I want to do. Then you can analyze trades using our trade analyzer, which balances the lifetime value, which includes pick values out to like 2028. All of that plus the rookie guide, $25 value is included. So if you're just in one Dynasty League, Dynasty Deluxe is well worth it. And use your host's promo code and you can bump up to all in and get $25 off.
All right, we are back here. And I'm going to continue with the running back position. I told you guys this was a little bit spicier list of fades. I'm not going with the whole, oh, Derrick Henry is old, we should fade him. And I don't know what we saw from Joe Mixon. He's dealing with injuries, we should fade him. I want to go with things that are just a little bit more intriguing, a little bit more nuanced here. So my first running back fade here is going to be James Cook. And I hate that because, again, this has absolutely nothing to do with him as a fantasy option from a pure production standpoint. Maybe regression is a concern for some people. Some of that would be expected. That's not the major issue here. Regression is okay, right? That would be expected with the fact that Cook had a dramatic increase in rushing touchdowns. He went from 2 rushing touchdowns per year the first 2 years of his season to tied with Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs for 16 rushing touchdowns to lead the league. So a little bit of reduction would be expected here, but there's no reason to believe that we still won't get 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns out of him. And if we do get that decrease in rushing touchdowns, perhaps a little bit of an uptick through the air, because when we're looking at his production last season, we saw that increased workload in terms of the touchdowns that he got on the ground. But he actually didn't see an increase in workload in terms of carries, right? Very negligible difference in carries from 2023 to 2024. Massive, aforementioned uptick in rushing touchdowns and a mediocre little dip in terms of receptions and receiving touchdowns. Cook had a fantastic year. Overall, RB8 in total fantasy points, RB10 in average fantasy points per game in half PPR, 15.7 fantasy points per game, high quality RB1. You're probably sitting here like, okay, you're talking so glowingly about him, Tara. What's the issue here? Unfortunately, the issue here is that we got off the field concerns with the contract dispute that is happening here. Cook is frustrated and he wants to be paid. I don't blame him. I'd never, ever, ever blame a running back for wanting to get a check, right? The quarterbacks, I mean, my God, they're getting all kinds of money thrown at them for being backup quarterbacks, right? For being mediocre quarterbacks, you're getting top dollar for just the promise of what you can be. I'm looking at you, Trevor Lawrence, right? So running backs, I don't have a problem with you sitting there arguing over your contract. What I do have a problem with is from a fantasy perspective. Unfortunately, that makes things a little bit tricky for us. As of right now, the contract issue does not look like it's going to be solved. And if that continues, and it looks like that he understands and he just accepts that he's not going to get his extension this year, we fall into that little murky T. Higgins category, right? That category where a player who is seeking a contract extension, and I say T. Higgins because that's just the one that I'm rolling with, but it's happened to quite a few players, right? And, justifiably slow. I'm not judging them and their money, right? And their bodies. But when you're in a contract dispute, oftentimes you get a little tweak in the ankle, a little pull in the hamstring that under normal circumstances wouldn't be a major issue, wouldn't cause you to miss major time, if any time at all. But under these contentious contract disputes, sometimes it takes you a little bit more time to heal. Yeah, we've seen it happen. And then with a player in the position of being very frustrated over a contract, we as fantasy managers get put into this position of worrying about him actually being on the field. And then speaking about being on the field, it goes a little bit deeper than that, actually. Cook could still technically hold out from training camp if he does get very frustrated. Running backs, and really anyone, but it's never a good combination, holding out and then heading into the season with a limited amount of time in training camp. That can often come with increased risk of injury, or perhaps the team, deciding this is not the direction that we want to go, and perhaps wanting to increase reps on a guy like Ray Davis. So if there were no contract dispute, if this was a perfect world, if they reached an agreement next week, I'm not fading James Cook. I'm perfectly okay with it. But until that issue is resolved, it's a no for me, dog. Concerns there. I've just been burned too many times by that. And yeah, we got a comment from Bai. And sell you. Bills are big mad. That is the major issue here. And I love that you were mentioning Ray Davis, because when I'm doing my best ball drafts, man, the deep drafts, I'm taking Ray Davis. It gets to a point where I'm looking at running backs, and that's the one that I always have starred. That's the one that I'm sitting there and saying, man, if there's an opportunity for anyone as a backup running back, this feels like that opportunity. Ray Davis is a guy that absolutely showed that he can produce value when thrown into the mix when James Cook was out. He can provide supplemental value. So if they want to see a little bit more of what they have with Davis, yeah, absolutely. So that's a big risk there, unfortunately. So Bills resolve everything, contract solved. There's no pettiness on either end. I'm all good. Love James Cook. What's not to love? Until that's resolved, I'm looking at it sideways because I'm tired of getting burned by people in contracts and unhappy fantasy players. Now to a guy who is not unhappy, unfortunately, a running back that I will be fading. It's Aaron Jones, and I hate that because I'm a Packers fan, and I absolutely hate to say that I am fading Aaron Jones because even in the transition to being a Minnesota Viking, I still have a lot of affinity for him, and I want to believe in him. But unfortunately, this is lining up to be a potentially very underwhelming year for Aaron Jones. At first glance, you're probably looking at his ADP, which is sitting around a low-end RB2, and you're thinking, that's not that bad. That's fine. He'll hit that 100%. He'll pay off. He always does. When has he not been an RB2? And on the surface, that does make sense, but there are a lot of underlying issues for the potential lack of production that we could see from Aaron Jones heading into the season. We got a couple of problems here, man. Problem number one, big problem. Jones had an outlier season that the Vikings do not want to repeat. They are clear on that. And it's smart. I'm not judging them for that. That is the right move. Aaron Jones had 255 carries last season, which you may be looking at that and saying, that's not that bad. That is not that bad for most running backs. If Derrick Henry gets 255, I'm like, whatever. Okay. Saquon gets 255. Okay, whatever. Aaron Jones having 255 carries was the most he has ever had in a single season in his entire career. Outside of one season where he had around 230, I believe, he has not come close to hitting that number ever. There's usually a good 50 carry gap between that. We're talking about a man that has played 8 years in the league, and he has never hit that number. That's concerning. And we know it's concerning because the Vikings have vocally expressed that that is something that they want to change. We don't want a running back that is coming off that level of volume heading into year 30 of his life. Year 30. I'm older than that. But year 30 of his life. Unfortunately, that ain't a good combination for running backs. Significantly higher workload that we have seen from him. And it came about in a very weird way. It was a lot of volume, but we didn't see the increase in production. In terms of on-the-ground touchdowns, he had just 5 rushing touchdowns. And this wouldn't be a problem if he had his expected Aaron Jones receiving touchdowns, but that didn't really come either, unfortunately. When you look at the context of the Vikings offense, yes, we do have a quarterback change, but I don't actually think that kind of helps in any way, shape, or form. We'll get to that in a second. But when you look at the Vikings in the context of their offense, when you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson, it kind of makes sense that there weren't a ton of touchdown opportunities for Aaron Jones. And it wasn't just the opportunities. It was that with the opportunities he got, which was plenty, he was straight up ineffective at the goal line, unfortunately. Last season, Jones had 42 attempts in the red zone. Yay, that's good. Resulted in just 4 rushing touchdowns. For comparison, so we can understand, Brian Robinson. We don't really consider that, look back at Brian Robinson's season, you don't remember it with fond memories, right? Also 42 carries in the red zone. 7 touchdowns. Kareem Hunt, 43 carries, 7 touchdowns. That's kind of highly concerning, right? Because he wasn't even the starting running back for a while. James Cook, 42 carries. We just talked about him. 11 touchdowns in the red zone. And this one's going to hurt. It's going to sting. Ramondre Stevenson, 41 carries, 6 touchdowns. I have 0 fond memories of Ramondre Stevenson's season. So when you put it that way and you line it up with Aaron Jones's numbers, you start to think, oh man, perhaps it was a little worse than I remember, right? And then we can, I wouldn't call it a disaster by any means. I'm not saying it was the worst thing in the world, right? He produced. But there's just a lot of things that if you kind of poke around at the stats and look, you start to get a little bit concerned. You see it visually. If you watch the games, you looked at it and you were like, he looks a little bit different. He looks like he's struggling a little bit at the goal line. Although there were some weird things that went on, right? And perhaps you can say, well, maybe the offensive line was the issue. Let's look at another stat there. Inside the 5, let's break it down even further. Inside the 5, of all running backs that had double-digit carries inside the 5, Jones was the only one to have negative yards. It starts to get a little bit weird. And quite frankly, Aaron Jones has never really been viewed as a goal line back. He's been productive in the red zone, but he's not a goal line back. And Minnesota sees the error of their ways. They have brought in a heavier hitter in Jordan Mason, and they have been vocally clear that they want to give touches to Jordan Mason to alleviate some of that early down work and that short yardage work and that goal line work. That is really the most effective way to use Aaron Jones. So when I'm looking at Kevin O'Connell, I'm like, yeah, your actions make sense. It makes sense perfectly. It worked in Green Bay. Unfortunately, it just hasn't translated over well into the Minnesota offense. They just don't operate in the same way where Aaron Jones has enough volume through the air and touchdown opportunities to counteract the usage of an additional back in the backfield. It was A.J. Dillon before. And a lot of times I've said before, I remember one time I referred to Aaron Jones as a committee back and someone argued with me. So he's not a committee back. Oh, he's a committee back. You just have negative views of a committee. Committees can work out very well. There's nothing wrong with it. A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones were operating in a committee. He was just the alpha in that committee and the more productive one from a fantasy perspective. But the difference in their carries, not that much. You just don't view it that way because he was so successful and so reliable. And you've just got bad memories of a committee in New England that leave you thinking negative thoughts. Yeah, I'm going to show this comment here. Mason is going to be the starter by the 3/4 mark of the season, in my opinion. I don't really disagree with you on that one. I really don't. Unfortunately, we are viewing kind of a little bit of a downturn on Aaron Jones. And to make matters even worse, unfortunately, now we insert JJ McCarthy, who, again, I like as a quarterback, but I don't like him for Aaron Jones as a quarterback. Now we're relying on essentially a first-year quarterback to be effective in checking down, to provide that dynamic nature for Aaron Jones. And at the same time, we have got that little increased carrot of that mobility that JJ McCarthy has. For all we know, he starts calling his number at the goal line, and it reduces workload even more for Aaron Jones. None of this is really adding up in his favor, unfortunately. Again, I talked about my view of the running back position last week and the fact that you better get your running backs early. You better get them as quickly as they can, because as I'm sitting here doing mock drafts, it tails off and gets very, very shaky in the dead zone. And Aaron Jones is kind of like that pinpoint where you start looking at it and it starts to get a little bit ugly. As of right now, he is the starter. You feel like you can rely on him as the RB2. But once you get into the season and see the actual workload, it might not be as pretty as you think. I kind of tip my hat there with New England committees, and I hate this one. Again, I don't like these fades, right? I take no pleasure in fading these guys. Make no mistake about that. This is not a list that has been generated from bitterness, right? I don't like this one, but we'll keep this one short and sweet. The third running back that I am fading is Travion Henderson, unfortunately. Again, I like Travion Henderson. I wish he went somewhere else. This is not a knock towards him whatsoever. But man, I worked hard to escape the chokehold that the Patriots backfield had on me, hoping and believing year after year in someone. He's going to come, no, I think one person's going to really take over. One person's going to really come through for us, man. I went through the delusion, right? I'm not judging. I was there. I've got a Ramondre Stevenson share sitting in Dynasty, and it's not going anywhere. No one's taking that. Man, I rostered James White every single year. It was fun. It was fun, every now and then to, pick him off waivers, drop him back, and say, man, I need a solid 8 points this week. Who can I turn to? James White. James White would always be there for you, specifically for that amount of points. Looking at the Patriots offense, they're actively trying to get back to the traditional Patriots offense. It's the Patriots way, right? And that's not good news for us. I have zero reason to believe that the Patriots and Josh McDaniels are going to abandon the strategy that worked for them for years and years. They're clearly, they hired Vrabel. Josh McDaniels is back. They clearly want to get back to the Patriots way. And I feel like it's kind of a little bit short-sighted for us to think that Ramondre Stevenson is going to disappear. He's not going to disappear. He's just going to stop getting that receiving work that we always loved for him, right? The magic for Ramondre Stevenson is for like a sliver of time. He was able to have the early down work and the receiving work enough to provide good fantasy value for us. But if we're looking at this backfield and they go to the traditional Patriots way and they make it so that we've got Ramondre Stevenson, short yardage, goal line, Travion, the dynamic back that's coming in there, the James Cook. I believe he even might have made that comparison himself. I don't want to be in that nostalgia. I don't. That's not what I want. That's not what I want to do this year. That's not the kind of fun that I want to have, right? You think about it, you go back to those James White times, and it was fun back then. It won't be fun now. Henderson is being drafted as a low-end RB2, and that should say a lot to you because let me tell you, some of those rankings right now, if you're looking at rankings and ECR and stuff like that, you have to take into account that some people technically didn't correctly update their rookie rankings. And so that's being dragged down a little bit. I've noticed that. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at rankings for these rookies. Some of them haven't been updated to where I believe that they will be. Henderson will absolutely be drafted as an RB2. Absolutely. People will, want to take him over a DeAndre Swift, over a Tony Pollard, whatnot, because you think that he is going to ascend especially because their last year was shaky for Ramondre Stevenson, to be, very transparent on that one. It was shaky in terms of the frustrations that the coaching staff had with ball security and whatnot. But again, this is going back, making adjustments, a new staff, a new philosophy. And I really struggle to get behind this one, unfortunately. If it were Travion Henderson in the context of anywhere else, really, I would be super okay. Even if he had gotten and arguably this could have been flip-flopped, but let's say that he had been drafted to Cleveland, I would still feel more comfortable because at the very least, I would say, yeah, I think he can be a 3-down back there, even if it's a dumpster fire, even if they don't know who's the quarterback. Even if the quarterback switches 4 times throughout the season, I would feel a little bit more comfortable with the known volume. I don't feel comfortable with the Patriots. I got out of that. I'm not going back, and I advise you to not do the same. We're not doing this again. Moving on to wide receivers here. Again, this is not a list of bitterness. This is a list of people that I actually do like a lot. T. Higgins is someone who I am looking at as a fade this season. My fair dear, if all my Clemson, let me get on the right side, with all of my Clemson stuff in the background, unfortunately, that's one that I'm struggling with. We all love the prospect of T. Higgins, the ceiling of T. Higgins. We know that despite being the wide receiver 2 in his offense, that he truly has wide receiver 1 upside on a weekly basis. He is so incredibly talented. He is worth that. And if he were anywhere else, we would have zero problem drafting him as a borderline wide receiver 1. And that is exactly where he is going and where he will be going. But he remains a Bengal. I feel like he was a little bit bullied into that contract, but he loves this team. He loves his teammates. They believe that they are built for a Super Bowl, and I understand why he did that. But from a fantasy perspective, we yet again are drafting T. Higgins above his ceiling. Well, theoretically, his ceiling is definitely above where he's being drafted. We cannot base our picks off theoretical ceilings. And we have 5 years of evidence that his ceiling is, in fact, a mid-tier wide receiver, too. That is it. And that's okay. That's a fine ceiling. That's not a problem. But for where he's being drafted, I do have a problem with it. Perhaps you feel a little bit more secure in the contract situation. We talked about that before when I was talking about James Cook, that now we've got T in a contract situation, and maybe we won't get those tricky little situations of tweaked hamstrings turning into multi-week absences. And that's fine. But we have 5 years, again, of evidence that say otherwise. And when I am looking at players being drafted over, that T. Higgins is being drafted over, let's go down the list. Tyreek Hill. Overall, wide receiver 1 upside when he's healthy. Garrett Wilson, massive target volume. And the first look for a quarterback that typically doesn't go beyond the first look. Love you, Justin Fields, but that's the case, Garrett Wilson can be his DJ Moore, and that worked out very well. Mike Evans, one of the more reliable receivers that we've had in fantasy for years and years and years. Terry McLaurin finally broke out with Jaden Daniels. Cortland Sutton, I've talked about the amount of confidence that I have in Cortland Sutton this year and the top 10 production that he put out in the back half of the season. And my expectation will continue. There are multiple other options as well. Wide receiver 2s that have been, that are technically not wide receiver 2s, like a Devontae Adams. We could even say Devontae Adams that is technically the wide receiver 2, but can certainly thrive as the Cooper Kupp of that offense with Matt Stafford, can earn favoritism there, can have high volume in a high production offense as well, and has been far more reliable in terms of his ability to stay on the field as long as he's not disgruntled in Vegas. All of those guys have a far cleaner path to top 5 production than T. Higgins. So while Higgins does have a theoretical high ceiling, technically speaking, it is very difficult for him to actually get there. Essentially impossible unless something were to happen to Jamar Chase. And we can't bank on that when we're drafting for fantasy. The best he can do at this point is pay off at his ADP. And there is a plethora of guys being drafted after him that can easily get higher than that. That's the only issue. That's why he's a fade. I just don't like the ADP. If it were pushed back to the actual production that we have seen out of him year after year, I'm perfectly okay with that. But unfortunately, that's never really been the case. We'll go to another one, and this one is a bit frustrating, but hear me out on this one. We're going to talk about the Chicago pass catchers. This one is the one that is not so controversial because we're all looking at that Chicago receiving room and the destruction that it had on fantasy managers last year. And we're hoping for better days this year, right? But we're very realistic here. When we're talking about quarterbacks, I mentioned Caleb Williams and the upside he has from a quarterback perspective, right? But the pass catchers, I can't lean into them the same way because the problem is that we're looking at everything from a very optimistic perspective. In a perfect world, Ben Johnson comes in, translates this offense into a direct replication of the Detroit Lions, gives us a clear wide receiver 1, gives us a solid wide receiver 2, a clear tight end 1. And if that were the case, there would be no issue with drafting any of these pass catchers at their ADP. But unfortunately, these things take time. Now, I'm willing to take that time with Caleb Williams, learning a new system, because, well, he is being rehabilitated and he has the rushing upside that counteracts that from a fantasy perspective. But that has nothing to do with his wide receivers, unfortunately. And trying to predict the Chicago receiving core last year was a complete nightmare. I guess it technically helps that Keenan Allen exited, but we got Luther Burden, a very dynamic pass catcher as well that can be deployed in a wide variety of ways. So it remains fairly messy. We still have Cole Kmet, but we've also got the addition of Colston Loveland, who will now work in and presumably be the tight end 1. So we're again looking at a very messy pass catching group for the Chicago Bears. It reads as cool for Caleb Williams, right? Awesome for him. He can look any direction, but that's the problem. He can look any direction, and there is no way to predict it on a weekly basis. I would like to see it before I actually want to dive into it. The offense screams inconsistency on a weekly basis. You will draft these pass catchers, they put them into your starting lineup. They will frustrate you to no end. 1 week, one's the wide receiver one. Another week, he gets 3 fantasy points. Then it flip flops, and then you get comfortable for a second, and then it flip flops again. It's going to be confusing. It's going to be too difficult to deal with. If I had to pick one, though, it would be the most ADP friendly and realistic one. Obviously, Rome Odunze. A lot of people have talked about the potential for him to be on that Jackson Smith and Jigba track, and that does make sense. It's not a direct comparison. They're not the same player. It's not the same offense. It's not the same situation, but his ADP is low enough that we wouldn't be completely panicked and screwed over if it doesn't pay off. If it doesn't go the right way with DJ Moore, his being drafted as a wide receiver, let's say wide receiver 20-ish is around where it will be, makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Colston Loveland is a big no, unfortunately, unless we get clear indications in preseason as to what his time on the field is going to look like. We have learned our lesson from the Dalton Kincaid addition to Dawson Knox. It don't necessarily work out, right? Because with tight ends, we want them to be the second option on their team. We want them to at least be the second look. And that's not really a realistic possibility right here now. We need things to work out a little bit. So the pass catching group in Chicago, it's a wee bit messy. It's a fade. If I do have to lean in one, it's a clear lean into Rome Odunze. One more receiver here, and then we'll wrap things up with the tight end. At receiver, it's Xavier Worthy. That's the fade here. And it's not an aggressive fade because the ADP isn't massively egregious, but it is a wee bit of a problem here. I can appreciate the late season breakout that we saw from Xavier Worthy. The fantasy production wasn't mind-blowing, but he did show the capacity for volume or varied usage, not so super gadgety. He had a couple double-digit target games. That was cool. I think it was 11 targets in 2 games, touchdowns, and, posted a borderline wide receiver 1, mid-tier wide receiver 2 performances. That's good. That's things that you can carry into the next season, feel positive about, lean into. But I ask you to consider this as you're thinking about Xavier Worthy. We can't forget about Rashee Rice. And let's ask us this question. When was the last time that Kansas City had, let's say we'll be generous, top 30 consistent receivers, like actual receivers, right? Emphasis on receivers, not a pass catcher, right? From Kansas City, right? Now you could argue, well, that was only because Travis Kelce was essentially operating as a wide receiver. He took a downturn last year, so we're not going to see that from him again. So that would open up the opportunities for Xavier Worthy to thrive alongside Rashee Rice, which in theory could work. In theory. But the problem with that is that Travis Kelce is not dead, right? He's here, right? He's still going to command some level of targets. It's just not going to be that overall target monster wide receiver or tight end one that we've seen in the past. That's not going to be the reality there anymore, but he's still going to be present. And I do believe that's enough to make him, make Xavier Worthy slightly more volatile than we would like to see. Rashee Rice is ready to go. The injury is not a concern. He's out there, not a recovery situation here. The only thing that we do have to deal with is that pesky little legal situation. But as we've seen, we can't really predict those right now. Obviously, as we lean more into the season, our legal experts, our wonderful fantasy legal experts will give us some more realistic timelines and stuff like that. But as of right now, we're rocking and rolling with Rashee Rice. And that potential for a suspension has been baked into his ADP for sure. I'm not convinced that it has been baked into the ADP for Xavier Worthy, and that is the problem. Conceptually, when you see a guy like Jameson Williams and Xavier Worthy ranked essentially next to each other, theoretically, they're both second look in their offense. You might say, okay, why can't he be the Jameson Williams? And we feel super comfortable drafting him there. There's a very glaring difference. There is a glaring difference of like 700 passing yards difference between Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes. There were 11 different touchdowns between Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes. Oddly enough, Mahomes actually has more attempts. Their offense just isn't really built like that. And it's possible that it could change, but I don't see it adjusting that much. So when we're looking at the Kansas City offense, they would need to increase pass at a pretty decent level to make Xavier Worthy pay off at his ADP. And I'm not sure we're going to get that philosophical change, unfortunately. We'll wrap things up with one tight end fade. And I told you again, and I'm going to repeat it in case anyone's coming in to the live right now, or in case anyone has forgotten. This is a wee bit of a spicier list that is not fades based off guys that I think are, Aaron Jones was a downturn, but for the most part, there's a lot of guys in there that are more situational, ADP, where they're being drafted and whatnot, additional concerns that are unrelated to their fantasy production as to reasons why we are fading them. So this is a unique list. I preface that by saying that my tight end fade here is Brock Bowers. Don't come at me with the pitchfork. I like Brock Bowers. This is not slanders towards Bowers in any way, shape, or form. He is the tight end one. That is clear. That is not a question. I'm not arguing that. My problem is, why are we drafting a tight end at the 1-2 turn? Have we not learned our lesson? Drafting Travis Kelce early was always about the positional advantage. But as we have seen, as Travis Kelce was kind of that outlier. As we've gotten further away from Travis Kelce's production and we've got more tilts and more players popping up and we had the Sam Laporta emergence and whatnot, the positional advantage of the tight end 1 compared to the tight end 4 or 3 isn't really justifiable enough to be taking somebody at the 1-2 turn. He is a fantastic player. I'm not knocking him one bit. But man, that's aggressive. That is very, very aggressive, right? When we're looking at, let's say, right, we're going to see some improved production from him because remember, he was just a rookie, right? So I'm not saying that we're going to be getting the exact same production out of him, right? But remember last year that George Kittle actually averaged a full fantasy point higher than him. George Kittle is the tight end 3, and he is going several rounds later. The difference between the fantasy production, and also George Kittle has been placed in a more advantageous situation as well with Brandon Ayuk out. There's no Deebo Samuel. Kittle is actually an incredible value for where he's being drafted. And when we're looking at taking Brock Bowers at the 1-2 turn, I've just got some problems with whether or not it is actually going to make a positive impact on your fantasy team for what you are foregoing that is available right there. Right? Because even if we give some leeways, right, and we make adjustments and improvements and throw in some more touchdown opportunities for him, I still don't think the payoff aligns with the end of the first round pick. We do have to consider that there are going to be significant changes in Vegas. We've got a new coaching staff, a new offensive philosophy. We've got a new, more competent quarterback that is not going to have to rely on exclusively Brock Bowers, that can actually hit his receivers downfield. He has got an arm. We've got a brand new running back in Ashton Genty, who can also contribute in the pass game. And, you know, we know how Pete Carroll feels about running the ball, right? This is going to be a balanced offense, right? Tight end is such a volatile position year after year. We've got some fancy tight end who deservingly so ascends, and we end up disappointed because by no fault of them, it's just that the offense adjusted a little bit, and tiny adjustments often affect the tight end position more than others. If you could take Brock Bowers in the third, in the early third, I'd be like, woo, absolutely. Maybe even late, I don't know, maybe even late second. But I mean, again, I told you that running back is a major concern for me. So even that's pushing it a little bit. But if I'm looking at the end of the first and guys that I would have to bypass for Brock Bowers, we're looking at guys like Nico Collins, Achan, McCaffrey now, AJ Brown, Drake London, Jonathan Taylor, Bucky Irving. What are we truly doing here? I don't know if it's giving us the advantage that we believe that we're going to have there. I personally, looking at the way that teams end up when they are taking Bowers at the 1-2 turn, I don't like the build. You can make it work if you're a savvy drafter. I do think you can, but you're probably making it a little bit harder on yourself than you need to. If you want to make it hard and you want to do it that way, by all means. And remember, we're not talking tight end premium, by the way. If you want to do it that way, be my guest. But I prefer to take the easier route and bypassing that and stacking up on a position that will be drying up mid-round, where in turn I can get something that is going to give me double-digit fantasy points as a tight end. And quite frankly, that's all you need. And the difference between that and Brock Bowers is not going to be that aggressive. That is the route that I prefer to go. So unfortunately, despite the love that I have for him, I'm not going to have Brock Bowers shares outside of Dynasty because in redraft, it's a bit much, man. It's a bit rich. But that wraps things up. Just to recap real quick, it was Justin Herbert, James Cook, Aaron Jones, I almost said Ramondre Stevenson, Travion Henderson, T. Higgins, the Chicago pass catchers as a whole. But if you got to go with one, it's got to be Rome Odunze with the discounted ADP that we got there. Then we also have Xavier Worthy, and then wrapping things up with Brock Bowers. These are people that I do, in fact, love and respect. But unfortunately, we got some ADP issues that could be popping through here. But that wraps things up here, you guys. I appreciate y'all tuning in. As a reminder, please make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast on all platforms, the Dear Miss Fantasy Podcast. If you're not already subscribed, please make sure that you're also subscribed to Player Profiler, and Player Profiler Now. And then also, if you're in the mood to continue to be generous, make sure that you subscribe to me on literally all platforms at It's Tera Time, ITSTERATIME, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that good stuff, pretty much everywhere. Man, we are inching closer to the season. It's going to be kicking up. Get excited, people. And oh my God, we're super close to Scott Fishbowl. Maybe we'll incorporate some of that because I will be drafting live in Houston. So that's going to be super fun there. So we'll probably talk about that too as we're heading in there and we're doing our best ball drafts and we are kicking things up as well. And if, as a reminder, if you were signing up for Fast Draft, or the Player Profiler All-In package, you can use the promo code TERA, super simple, TERA, to get $25 match on Fast Draft and $25 off the Player Profiler All-In package. So that is pretty cool. Other than that, I appreciate you all tuning in here. Thank you so much. I will talk to you again next week. Have a fantastic week.